Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Night Reader. I'm your storyteller tonight, and I hope you're wrapped up safe and warm wherever you are. Before we drift into the strange and unsettling, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time you're joining me. I love knowing where our Night Reader family is listening from all around the world. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable under the covers, and let the darkness outside melt away. But beware, even in the safety of your room, the unknown can sometimes find a way in. Tonight I bring you a story that begins quietly, like a whisper in the trees, and slowly pulls you into a nightmare far older than any of us. It all started when my cousin Ethan invited me to spend a weekend at his new house. He had recently moved to a small town tucked deep into the Appalachian Mountains, a place so remote that you'd lose cell phone service an hour before even reaching the town's only gas station. It was the kind of isolation that could be both beautiful and, if you thought too much about it, a little unnerving. Ethan had bought a cheap, centuries-old farmhouse that he planned to restore. He was always good with his hands and loved the idea of fixing something neglected, breathing new life into it. But when I arrived, I immediately felt that no matter how much paint or polish he applied, the house would never feel right. The trees surrounding the property were dense, casting long shadows even during the day. The air was heavy, still, as if it were holding its breath. And the house itself, it seemed to sag inward, like it was tired of standing. Ethan greeted me at the door, his smile wide, but there was something tense in his eyes. I chalked it up to the stress of moving and renovating, but as we stepped inside, the atmosphere thickened. The floorboards creaked in protest under our feet, and the walls were covered in faded wallpaper that peeled like ancient skin. "There's still a lot of work to do," he said, almost apologetically, leading me down a narrow hallway toward the guest room. "You'll hear some weird noises at night. Old pipes, settling wood, old house stuff." I nodded, but deep down, I wasn't convinced that the house's sounds would be easily explained away. The guest room was small but cozy enough. A narrow bed, a wooden dresser, and a single window looking out onto the forest. I set my bag down and pulled the curtains closed. For some reason, I didn't like the idea of that endless blackness outside staring back at me. Dinner was simple. Canned soup and stale bread, but it was nice catching up with Ethan. We laughed about old memories and made plans to hike the nearby trails the next day. For a moment, I forgot about the strange feeling clinging to the house, but as the night wore on, a restless energy seemed to seep through the walls. Around midnight, after tossing and turning in bed, I heard it. A faint knocking sound, coming from the direction of the window. My heart leapt into my throat. I lay perfectly still, straining to hear. Another knock, louder this time, and then the unmistakable sound of something dragging across the glass. I squeezed my eyes shut. It had to be a tree branch, I told myself. The wind, maybe. But when I opened my eyes, the curtains shifted, as if something from the other side was pushing against them. I wanted to call out to Ethan, but my throat felt paralyzed. Slowly, silently, I slid out of bed and tiptoed toward the door. I was halfway across the room when the knocking stopped. A sudden, eerie silence blanketed the house. I froze, waiting for any sign of movement. Then a soft, deliberate knock, this time on the door. I held my breath. No one spoke. No footsteps. Just a knock, patient and expectant. After what felt like an eternity, I whispered, "Ethan?" No answer. Another knock, slower, almost playful. I backed away from the door, heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. Grabbing my phone from the nightstand, I quickly turned on the flashlight. The beam shook with my trembling hand as I pointed it toward the door. There was no shadow underneath, no sign of feet. Whoever, whatever, was there. They weren't standing like a normal person would. The doorknob began to turn slowly, squeaking with each movement. Without thinking, I bolted to the window, throwing the curtains open. Outside, the forest stood dark and silent. No branches touching the window, no wind, nothing that could have made the earlier sounds. In a panic, I turned back to the door. The knob had stopped moving. A long, deep scratch ran down the wood as if made by nails or claws. I stayed awake the rest of the night, flashlight clutched in my hand, staring at the door and waiting for another sound, another sign. Morning came with a pale, cold light filtering through the window. I stumbled out into the hallway, desperate to find Ethan. He was already in the kitchen, pouring coffee, looking like he hadn't slept much either. "Rough night?" he asked, trying to sound casual. I opened my mouth to tell him everything, but something in his expression stopped me. There was a flicker of fear there, quickly masked by a forced smile. "Yeah," I said finally. "Old house sounds." He nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he brought the coffee mug to his lips. We didn't talk about it. But from that moment on, the house felt different. The air seemed heavier, the shadows deeper, as if by acknowledging the night's events, we would give whatever was out there more power. Later that day, as we explored the property, Ethan casually mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "You know," he said, pointing to the dense woods beyond the house, "the old owner used to say there were things in the forest. Things that didn't want to be seen." I forced a laugh. "Folklore? Maybe," he shrugged. "Or maybe just old stories to keep kids from wandering off." But as he said it, he avoided looking at the woods. Like he knew full well that the stories might be more than just warnings. And that night, something came back to knock again. That night, I prepared myself better. I kept my flashlight close, the curtains drawn tight, and a heavy chair wedged under the door handle. It was a flimsy defense, but it made me feel a little less exposed. Ethan and I hadn't discussed what had happened, but there was a silent understanding between us. Something was wrong, and pretending otherwise wouldn't make it go away. As the hours dragged by, I lay in bed, stiff as a corpse, listening. The house shifted and groaned with the cool mountain air, but beneath those natural sounds, there was something else. A soft tapping, like nails against wood. Far off at first, then closer still. I stared at the door, watching the shadows dance in the weak moonlight leaking through the curtains. I don't know how long I lay there before I realized the tapping wasn't at the door this time. It was at the window. Very slowly, I sat up and turned toward it. The curtains fluttered slightly, but there was no breeze. I squeezed the flashlight until my knuckles turned white. Summoning every shred of courage, I clicked it on and aimed the beam at the window. At first, I saw nothing but the pale fabric. Then, faintly, the shape of a hand, pressing against the glass. Fingers long and thin, almost skeletal. It lingered there, motionless, as if it was waiting for something. My mouth went dry. I wanted to scream, to wake Ethan, but a deep, primal instinct told me that drawing attention to myself would only make it worse. I stayed perfectly still, willing my heart to slow down, willing the thing outside to lose interest. After what felt like an eternity, the hand slid down the window, leaving behind a streak that almost looked like ash. I listened as the footsteps retreated, soft, deliberate, crunching on the dead leaves outside, until finally, there was silence once more. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. Whatever was outside wasn't just passing through. It was watching, waiting, growing bolder. By the third day, Ethan admitted he had been hearing things too, scratching at the walls, whispering voices just beyond the edge of hearing. He even showed me marks on the outside of the house, deep gouges along the siding, as if something with claws had been circling, looking for a way in. "We should leave," I said, not caring how cowardly it sounded. Ethan shook his head. I can't. The papers, the town owns the house now. If I bail before the renovations are done, they'll sue me for breach of contract. I'll lose everything. It sounded insane, but Ethan was stubborn like that. He would rather risk his sanity than lose face. So we stayed. That night, the knocking returned. Louder this time. More insistent. It wasn't just at my door, but at Ethan's too, at the windows, at the very walls of the house. Like a storm of hands, all demanding to be let in. I buried myself under the covers like a child, flashlight clutched tight, praying for morning. Hours passed. The knocking subsided. I must have drifted off at some point because I woke up to the pale gray light of dawn seeping through the window. Bleary-eyed, I stumbled into the hallway, expecting to find Ethan in the kitchen again, worn down but still stubbornly cheerful. Instead, the house was silent. I called his name, but there was no answer. A cold dread settled over me as I checked each room. His bedroom was empty. The living room, the kitchen, empty. No sign of a struggle, no blood, no broken furniture. Just an oppressive, heavy stillness. I found the front door slightly ajar, the morning fog curling in like ghostly fingers. Outside, the ground was churned up with footprints. Ethan's and others, smaller, lighter. Dozens of them circling the house, leading off into the woods. Against every instinct screaming at me to turn back, I followed the trail. It wound through the dense trees, deeper and deeper into the wilderness. The forest seemed darker than before. The trees leaning in, whispering secrets I didn't want to hear. After what felt like hours, I found him. Ethan stood in a small clearing facing away from me, motionless. His clothes were torn, his hair matted with leaves and dirt. I called out to him, but he didn't react. Slowly, carefully, I approached. When I touched his shoulder, he turned. His eyes were wide and glassy, unblinking. His mouth hung open as if frozen mid-scream, though no sound came out. His face was pale, almost gray, and his body was cold to the touch. I stumbled back in horror. That's when I noticed the figures lurking just beyond the tree line. Dozens of them. Thin, pale shapes. Their faces blurred as if the forest itself refused to fully reveal them. They didn't move. They only watched. I grabbed Ethan's arm and tried to drag him back toward the house, but he wouldn't budge. It was like he was rooted to the spot. Panic rising, I let go and turned back to the trail, only to find it gone. The woods shifted, closing in around us, twisting paths that had never been there before. The figures began to advance, slow and deliberate, silent as falling snow. Desperation took over. I grabbed Ethan again and shook him hard, screaming his name. His body convulsed, his mouth opening wider and wider, until with a sickening crack, his jaw unhinged grotesquely. A thick, black mist poured out, curling in the air like smoke, carrying with it a chorus of faint whispers. And then, as quickly as it had started, the figures stopped. They stood there, waiting. I realized with a horrible certainty that they weren't after Ethan anymore. They were after me. I ran. I didn't think, didn't look back. I crashed through the underbrush, ignoring the branches tearing at my skin, the whispers growing louder and louder in my ears. I ran until my lungs burned, until the house came into view, until I could slam the door shut behind me and collapse against it, sobbing. Inside, the house felt wrong. The walls seemed to pulse, the air thick with the stench of rot. In the kitchen, the floorboards were split open as if something had forced its way up from beneath. Whatever had claimed Ethan wasn't finished. And now, it had my scent. I spent the rest of the day barricading the house the best I could. Every window was nailed shut. Every door reinforced with whatever heavy furniture I could find. It was a pathetic defense, I knew. If they really wanted in, the old walls wouldn't stop them. But it gave me something to do, besides sit there and listen to the slow creeping madness curling around the edges of my mind. The sun slipped behind the trees far too quickly, and with it, any last illusion of safety. Darkness spilled over the property like ink. I sat in the living room, flashlight in hand, watching the shadows stretch and coil along the walls. At first, it was quiet, almost peaceful in a way that made my skin crawl. I had learned that true terror doesn't always announce itself with screams or violence. Sometimes it waits in silence, patient, knowing you'll break yourself before it even has to move. And then the whispering started again. Soft at first, like the distant rustling of leaves. Then closer, stronger. Words I couldn't quite understand, murmured just beyond the edge of hearing. They came from the walls, from the floorboards, from the very air itself. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the whispers burrowed into my mind. Relentless. Let us in. I don't know if I truly heard those words or if my imagination filled in the gaps, but the meaning was clear. They were asking. No, demanding. Something rattled at the front door. Then a slow, deliberate knock. Polite as a neighbor stopping by for a visit. I stared at the door, heart hammering, sweat pouring down my back. Another knock. Louder. Impatient. And then the unmistakable sound of the doorknob turning, testing. The nails I had driven into the frame groaned in protest. I stumbled back, flashlight beam jerking wildly across the room. Shadows twisted and flinched at the edges of the light. I thought I saw shapes. Too tall, too thin. Standing just outside the windows, hands pressed against the glass. The floor beneath me trembled slightly, as if something massive moved underneath the house. A deep, low rumble vibrated up through the soles of my feet. Without thinking, I bolted upstairs. The guest room was no safer, but at least there was only one entrance. I shoved the dresser against the door and collapsed onto the bed, gasping for breath. The knocking followed me. This time, it was at the window. A slow scrape of nails across the glass. A pattern of tapping that almost sounded like a song. I kept the flashlight trained on the window, praying it wouldn't break, praying the thin layer of glass would hold against whatever wanted so badly to get inside. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time had lost all meaning, and somehow the whispers began to lull me into a stupor. My body was exhausted, my mind fraying at the edges, my eyelids drooped, my grip on the flashlight loosened. I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of breathing, not my own. It was coming from the far corner of the room, where the shadows pooled thickest. Deep, ragged breaths, like something struggling to contain itself. The flashlight was still clutched weakly in my hand. I dared not move it, dared not shine it toward the corner. Some part of me understood instinctively. If I acknowledged it, if I looked directly at it, it would have the permission it needed. So I stayed frozen, eyes wide in the dim light, listening to the slow, hungry breathing. The sun finally rose, bleeding pale gray through the thin curtains. As the light grew stronger, the breathing faded, retreating into the walls, into the floor, into the very bones of the house. I stumbled downstairs on trembling legs. The front door stood open, swinging lazily in the morning breeze. The furniture I had barricaded it with was smashed to splinters. They had been inside. They had walked the same halls I had. They had stood in the same room, inches from where I slept. A broken whisper slipped from my cracked lips. I have to leave. But something deep down told me it wasn't going to be that simple. I packed a small bag in a frenzy, barely thinking. Essentials only. Food, water, my flashlight, a map Ethan had left pinned to the wall. I wouldn't wait for nightfall to trap me again. I'd leave now, find the road, hitchhike to the nearest town if I had to. As I crossed The threshold of the house. I realized the forest was silent. No birds, no insects, not even the rustling of leaves. Dead silence. The trail leading back to the main road was overgrown, more than it should have been after just a few days. Thick brambles tangled across the path. Thorny vines clutching at my legs as if trying to pull me back. I hacked and fought my way forward, sweating and cursing under my breath. After what felt like hours, I should have reached the road. But the forest just stretched on endlessly. The map was useless. Landmarks shifted. Trails doubled back on themselves. The trees grew denser, their trunks twisted into grotesque shapes that seemed almost human. And behind me, always just at the edge of hearing, the soft shuffle of footsteps. They were following me. I broke into a run, panic giving me strength. Branches tore at my face and arms. My lungs burned. I didn't care. I had to get out. I burst into a clearing and froze. It was the house. Impossible. But there it was, slumped and sagging in the clearing as if it had been waiting for me. Number no. I had been walking away. I hadn't turned around. The front door creaked open slowly as if an invitation, and standing there in the doorway, smiling a smile that was all wrong, was Ethan. He beckoned, and somewhere deep inside I knew, if I walked back into that house, I would never leave again. I turned and ran, the woods closing in, the whispers growing louder, the ground shifting under my feet as reality itself seemed to bend and writhe. And somewhere, buried deep beneath the terror, a realization took root. I wasn't lost in the woods. I was caught in something else's trap, something ancient, something that had been waiting a very long time. The forest felt alive now, a vast and endless thing breathing around me. The trees leaned closer with every step, their branches stretching like arms to catch me. The ground underfoot became soft and unstable, and sometimes, when I dared glance down, I thought I saw faces staring up at me from the earth. Faces twisted in agony, mouths open in silent screams. I kept moving, half blind, tears streaking my face. Exhaustion gnawed at my legs, but the thought of stopping even for a second filled me with a terror more potent than anything else. I had to believe there was a way out. There had to be. And then, breaking through the tangled trees, I stumbled onto a path. A real one. Not the game trails that looped endlessly through the woods, but an old, cracked asphalt road, barely visible beneath years of fallen leaves and moss. Relief flooded through me so suddenly, I almost collapsed. I forced myself forward, my shoes scraping against the rough surface. The road curved sharply ahead, disappearing behind a thick stand of ancient oaks. Without thinking, I followed it. As I rounded the bend, a building appeared through the mist. A gas station, rusted and decrepit, leaning sideways as if weighed down by the years. A battered sign swung in the breeze, its once bright letters faded into ghostly outlines. Hope flickered to life in my chest. Maybe someone was there. Maybe I could find a phone, call for help, get away from whatever nightmare had swallowed the woods. The door to the station stood slightly ajar, creaking as it moved in the wind. I pushed it open cautiously, the bell above jingling weakly. The inside smelled of mildew and gasoline. Shelves stood half-toppled, their contents scattered across the cracked linoleum floor. A long dead ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, stirred by some unseen draft. Hello. My voice came out small and hoarse. Is anyone here? Silence answered. I stepped further inside, each footstep echoing too loudly. The counter was covered in dust, but there were fresh handprints smeared across it. Long, narrow handprints that dragged down toward the floor. Behind the counter, an old rotary phone hung on the wall. I rushed over, grabbing the receiver, but there was no dial tone, just a low, pulsing hum, like a heartbeat buried deep beneath the static. Despair clawed at me again. But before I could think too long about it, something in the corner of the room moved. A figure, small, hunched, darted behind the aisles. "Wait!" I called out, though every instinct screamed at me to run the other way. I moved slowly, carefully, around the shelves, heart pounding against my ribs. There, crouched among fallen cans and debris, was a boy, maybe 10 years old, dirty and bruised, with wide, terrified eyes that locked onto mine. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I knelt down slowly. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. Are you alone? Are you hurt?" The boy shook his head frantically, tears spilling down his cheeks. He gestured wildly toward the back of the store, his little hands shaking so badly they were almost a blur. Before I could ask anything else, the lights overhead flickered violently. The boy's eyes widened even further, and he scrambled backward, disappearing into the shadows between the shelves. The temperature dropped suddenly. My breath fogged in the air. The hum on the phone grew louder, more rhythmic, almost chanting. And then, from the darkness at the back of the store, came the soft patter of footsteps. Not running, walking, deliberate, heavy. I stumbled backward, clutching the useless receiver like a weapon. The aisles narrowed around me, and for a brief, insane moment, I thought they were actually moving, closing me in. A figure stepped into view. It was tall, impossibly tall, its body wrapped in filthy cloth strips like a makeshift shroud. No face, no features. Just a void where a head should have been. It moved slowly, each step measured as if savoring the moment. The boy's terrified whimper echoed somewhere to my left, but I couldn't risk taking my eyes off the thing. Every instinct screamed that if I looked away, even for a second, it would be upon me. I backed up toward the door, step by trembling step. The thing tilted its head, or what should have been a head, and lifted one long, spindly arm, pointing directly at me. The temperature dropped even further. Frost bloomed across the windows, spreading in intricate, grasping patterns. I turned and fled. The door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang, and I nearly tripped over the cracked steps as I sprinted back onto the road. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if it was following. I just ran. The road stretched out endlessly, winding through mist and shadow. I had no idea if I was getting closer to escape or just deeper into whatever nightmare had taken root here. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Somewhere behind me, I thought I heard the faint jingle of the gas station bell, as if the door had opened once again, as if something had stepped out and was coming after me. I didn't stop running until my legs gave out, and I collapsed by the side of the road, gasping and shaking. The mist thickened, swirling around me like grasping fingers, and from within it, a voice spoke, low, clear, right beside my ear. "You can't leave." I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the mist, just the endless road, and ahead of me, barely visible through the gloom, a light flickering weakly. A house, a different one this time, old, sagging, its windows glowing faintly with a sickly yellow light. Hope and dread warred within me, but I knew I had no other choice. I forced myself up, my body screaming in protest, and staggered toward it. Each step forward felt heavier, as if invisible hands tried to pull me back. And somewhere deep in the mist behind me, I thought I heard laughter, software mocking, hungry. The house loomed closer with every stumbling step. Its weather-beaten siding peeled in long strips, exposing the gray skeleton beneath. Shutters hung askew like broken wings, and the roof sagged inward as though the house were trying to collapse into itself and hide from the world. A narrow porch jutted out in front, its boards rotted and uneven, creaking softly under the weight of nothing. The front door stood slightly open, swaying gently in the wind that carried the faintest scent of something rotten, something old. My mind screamed at me to turn back, to find another way, but my body moved forward as if pulled by unseen strings. I climbed the rickety steps, each one groaning louder than the last, and pushed the door wider with the tips of my fingers. It swung open with a drawn-out whine, revealing a hallway swallowed in darkness. Only a few patches of sickly yellow light pooled on the warped wooden floor, seeping from unseen cracks in the ceiling above. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling, barely rising above a whisper. The house absorbed the sound greedily, offering no echo in return. I crossed the threshold. The door slammed shut behind me with a force that rattled the floorboards, plunging me into almost complete darkness. Panic flared white-hot in my chest, but before I could move, a series of dim lights flickered on, one by one, leading deeper into the house. They illuminated a narrow, endless hallway lined with crooked picture frames. Dust motes danced in the stale air, catching the feeble light. I stepped forward, each footstep muffled by the thick layer of dust and grime that covered everything. The pictures on the walls were strange. At first, they seemed like ordinary portraits. Families frozen in time, stiff smiles and old-fashioned clothing. But as I moved past them, I realized something was horribly wrong. Their eyes, every single person in every single frame, were missing. Hollow sockets stared out at me, and some of the figures had mouths twisted into silent screams. I tore my gaze away and pressed onward, my heart hammering against my ribs. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the walls closing in tighter with every step. Doors lined the corridor, each one slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of rooms filled with shifting shadows and furniture covered in stained white sheets. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look too closely. At the end of the hall, a grand staircase spiraled upward into darkness. The lights here were dimmer, flickering wildly as if struggling to stay alive. I hesitated at the base of the stairs, every instinct screaming at me to turn around. But when I looked back, the hallway behind me was gone, replaced by an endless, black void. I had no choice. I climbed. The steps groaned and shuddered under my weight, and with each one I took, the darkness above seemed to pulse, as though it were alive. Halfway up, a cold hand brushed against my ankle. I gasped and nearly fell, spinning around to see nothing, just empty stairs behind me. I didn't stop again. At the top of the staircase, a narrow landing stretched left and right. At the center of the landing stood a large mirror in an ornate, cracked frame. The glass was fogged and mottled with age, but I could make out my own reflection, pale, wild-eyed, shaking. And behind me, something moved. A shadow, tall and thin, creeping closer. I whirled around. The landing was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, the reflection showed the shadow still there, standing right behind me, a grin of jagged teeth splitting its featureless face. I stumbled away, nearly tripping over a loose floorboard. The mirror cracked loudly, a spiderweb of fractures spreading out from the center. From the cracks, something black and oily began to seep, dripping onto the floor. Without thinking, I bolted down the left hallway, the boards groaning and sagging beneath me. Doors lined this corridor too, but they were all closed tight, as if hiding something inside. A low, rhythmic thumping filled the air, vibrating through the walls and floor. It sounded like a heartbeat, slow, deep, and getting louder with each passing second. I reached the end of the hallway and found another door, this one larger and more ornate, with strange symbols carved into the wood. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob. The door swung open easily, revealing a room bathed in a soft golden light. It was a child's bedroom. A small bed sat against one wall, its covers neatly made. Toys littered the floor, old-fashioned wooden blocks, a ragged teddy bear, a spinning top frozen mid-spin. On the walls were cheerful paintings of smiling suns and fluffy clouds, but their colors were faded and distorted, giving them a twisted, surreal quality. In the center of the room sat a little girl. She wore a simple white dress, her hair neatly braided down her back. She was humming a soft, tuneless melody as she rocked back and forth, her back to me. I stepped into the room cautiously. The door slammed shut behind me. The girl stopped humming. Slowly, she turned her head, just her head, unnaturally far, until she was looking at me over her shoulder. Her eyes were gone. Hollow sockets, weeping black tears. "Play with me," she whispered, her voice high and sweet, but carrying an undertone of something rotten, something ancient. I shook my head, backing away. Her smile widened, splitting her face unnaturally. "You can't leave," she said. From the corners of the room, the shadows deepened and thickened, coalescing into forms, small, childlike figures, eyeless and grinning, reaching out with long, clawed fingers. I turned and pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. The girl's humming resumed, louder now, faster, and the room spun around me. The toys on the floor twitched and jerked, moving on their own, crawling toward me with broken, jerky movements. The light in the room flickered, growing dimmer, and the air grew thick and heavy. I pressed my back against the door, chest heaving, mind racing. There had to be a way out. There had to be. The teddy bear at my feet opened its stitch mouth and let out a shrill human scream. I clamped my hands over my ears, sinking to my knees. The girl's shadow loomed over me. "Stay," she said, her voice now layered with many voices, old and young, male and female, all speaking at once. "Stay and play forever." I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would all vanish, that I would wake up in my own bed, safe and sound. But the cold, clawed fingers closed around my wrists, dragging me forward into the darkness. I don't know how long I was trapped there, drifting in the suffocating dark. Time didn't seem to pass normally in that place. Seconds stretched into hours, or maybe the other way around. My body floated, weightless, while distant whispers circled me like vultures. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, guttural and broken, yet somehow I knew they were speaking about me. When I finally opened my eyes, I wasn't in the child's room. Anymore, I was lying on a cold stone floor, the dampness seeping through my clothes. A faint light flickered from torches mounted on the walls, casting long, twisted shadows that danced and writhed with every flicker of the flame. I sat up slowly, my head pounding with a dull, persistent ache. The room was cavernous, the walls made of old, crumbling bricks slick with moisture. At the far end of the space stood a massive iron door, covered in rust, and strange symbols etched deep into the metal. Chains hung from the ceiling, some of them broken, others swaying gently in an unseen breeze. And in the center of the room was a figure. It stood perfectly still, draped in heavy, tattered robes that trailed along the ground. Its face was hidden beneath a deep hood, but I could feel its gaze burning into me, cold and unfeeling. I tried to move, but my limbs felt heavy, sluggish, as if the air itself resisted me. The figure lifted one skeletal hand and pointed at me. Without a word, the iron door behind it groaned and shuddered, slowly creaking open. Beyond it, there was only darkness. The figure stepped aside, gesturing for me to pass through. I stumbled to my feet, every instinct screaming at me to refuse, to fight, to find another way. But when I turned back toward the way I had come, there was only a solid wall. No doorway, no exit, just endless, unbroken stone. I had no choice. I crossed the threshold. The darkness swallowed me whole. At first, I thought I had gone blind. There was no light, no sound, not even the echo of my own breathing. Just an oppressive, smothering nothingness pressing in on all sides. Then, slowly, a dim, pulsing glow appeared ahead of me, like a heartbeat in the void. I moved toward it, drawn by some force I couldn't resist. As I got closer, I realized the light was coming from a pit. a deep, gaping hole in the ground, its edges lined with jagged stones. The glow came from something far, far below, something that shifted and writhed like a living thing. I leaned over the edge, peering into the abyss. Something moved. A massive shape, too big to comprehend, slithered beneath the surface, sending ripples through the strange light. I staggered back, heart pounding. A whisper brushed against my ear. "Jump!" I spun around, but there was no one there. Just the endless black. "Jump!" the voice said again, louder this time, more insistent. I shook my head, backing away from the pit. The ground beneath my feet trembled. Cracks spider-webbed out from the edges of the hole, racing toward me. The stones crumbled, and I scrambled to stay upright, but there was nowhere to run. The floor gave way, and I plunged downward into the glowing abyss. The fall seemed endless. Colors I couldn't name flashed around me, and the whispering grew louder, layering into a chaotic cacophony. Images flickered past, faces twisted in agony, places I had never seen, but somehow recognized. Memories that weren't mine. And through it all, I felt it watching me, something ancient, something hungry. When I finally landed, it was with a bone-jarring thud on a floor of smooth, cold stone. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, my mind reeling. I had fallen into a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in darkness. Towering pillars rose from the ground, each carved with grotesque scenes of suffering and madness. Rivers of black liquid flowed between them, steaming and bubbling, and at the center of it all was an altar. It was massive, carved from a single block of obsidian, slick with the same black substance that flowed through the rivers. Symbols glowed faintly along its surface, pulsing in time with the beat of my heart. I approached it unwillingly, as if my body no longer answered to me. As I drew closer, I saw that something lay atop the altar. A figure. It was me. Or rather, it was something that looked exactly like me, down to the smallest detail. The same clothes, the same cuts and bruises, even the same expression of wide-eyed terror. It opened its eyes and smiled. I stumbled back, but unseen hands caught me, holding me fast. The other me sat up slowly, its movements jerky and unnatural. "You can't leave," it said in my voice. "You are part of this now." The hands pushed me forward, forcing me toward the altar. I fought, kicking and screaming, but it was no use. The grip tightened, bruising my skin, dragging me closer. The other me reached out, and when our hands touched, a searing pain shot through my body. Visions exploded in my mind, endless corridors of mirrors, each reflecting a different nightmare. Oceans of black water filled with writhing shapes. A sky torn open by countless screaming mouths. I screamed, but no sound came out. The other me laughed, a hollow, broken sound, and pulled me onto the altar. The darkness closed in, crushing, smothering, devouring. And then, silence. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing in the middle of a deserted street. The night was cold, and a thick fog clung to the ground, swirling around my feet. The houses lining the street were dark and silent, their windows like dead eyes. In the distance, I heard the faint, tinny sound of a music box playing a broken lullaby. I had no idea where I was, but deep down, I knew one thing for certain. I hadn't escaped. I had only gone deeper. I started walking, my steps echoing unnaturally loud against the cracked pavement. The fog seemed to grow thicker with every step, curling around my legs, tugging at my clothes like invisible hands. The broken lullaby grew louder too, its melody warping and twisting in ways that made my skin crawl. The street felt endless, stretching out into darkness. I passed house after house, each one more decayed than the last. Doors hanging from rusted hinges, windows shattered, roofs sagging under the weight of neglect. It felt less like a neighborhood and more like a mausoleum, a place abandoned not just by people, but by time itself. At one point I saw movement in the window of a nearby house, just a flicker, a shadow slipping by. I froze, heart hammering, but when I looked closer, the window was empty, nothing but darkness inside. I told myself to keep moving. I needed to find a way out, a way back to somewhere real. But the music box kept calling. Eventually, the road led me to a small park, its swings rusted and creaking as if moved by an unseen breeze. In the center stood a dilapidated merry-go-round, spinning slowly even though there was no one there to push it. And sitting on one of the swings was a little girl. Her dress was tattered and dirty, and her bare feet dangled just above the ground. Her hair was long and matted, obscuring her face. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge me, but the music seemed to emanate from her, filling the air with its off-key lullaby. I didn't want to approach. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to flee, but my body disobeyed. My feet moved on their own, step by painful step, drawing me closer to her. When I was just a few feet away, the girl finally lifted her head. Her face was wrong. Her eyes were too large, too dark, swallowing what little light there was. Her mouth stretched into a wide, unnatural grin that split her face nearly in two. Without breaking eye contact, she began to speak. "Why are you here?" Her voice was not the voice of a child. It was deep, rasping, layered with countless echoes as if 100 voices spoke through her at once. I don't know," I managed to stammer, my throat dry and tight. "You were chosen," she said, swinging gently back and forth. "You heard the call. I didn't choose anything," I whispered. The girl tilted her head to one side, studying me. Few do. She stopped swinging and placed a filthy hand over her heart. "But once you're marked, there is no turning back." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, and when I looked down, I saw a faint black symbol seared into my skin just above my heart. A twisting, serpentine shape that seemed to shift and writhe when I stared at it. I stumbled back, clutching at the mark, but the pain only grew. The girl stood up from the swing and pointed past the merry-go-round. There is a house waiting for you," she said. "It knows your name." Before I could ask anything else, the world around me began to dissolve. The playground, the swings, even the fog itself melted into darkness, and then I was standing in front of a house. It was massive, looming over me like a living thing. Its windows were lit from within, casting a sickly yellow glow onto the rotting porch. The front door was cracked open, swinging gently on its hinges, beckoning. I didn't want to go in. Every fiber of my being resisted, but something stronger pulled me forward. I crossed the threshold. The door slammed shut behind me with a thunderous boom that shook the floor. Inside, the house was a maze of narrow hallways and steep staircases, the walls lined with peeling wallpaper and strange, faded portraits. The faces in the paintings seemed to watch me, their eyes following my every move. I wandered through the labyrinthine corridors, my footsteps muffled by thick layers of dust. Occasionally I would hear something, a soft giggle echoing from around a corner, the distant sound of footsteps that were not my own, the slow, deliberate creak of floorboards overhead. At one point, I passed a mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. My reflection didn't match my movements. It stood there smiling at me. I tore my gaze away and hurried down the hallway, but I could feel its eyes on my back, its grin widening with every step. Eventually, I found myself in a vast, dimly lit dining room. A long table stretched down the center, covered in a moldy, tattered cloth. Around it sat figures, dozens of them, frozen in place croqueting, dressed in decaying formal wear. Their faces were skeletal, skin stretched tight over yellowed bone, empty eye sockets staring blankly into space. And at the head of the table sat another version of myself. This one was pristine, immaculate, wearing clean clothes, sitting tall and regal, a grotesque mockery of who I was. It raised a glass in my direction and spoke in a voice that reverberated through the room. "Welcome home." The seated figures turned their heads toward me in unison, their mouths opening in silent screams. I backed away, heart pounding, but the doors slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside. The other me rose from the chair and began to walk toward me, each step heavy and deliberate. "You belong to us now," it said, its eyes glinting with something predatory. I turned and ran, weaving through the frozen figures, desperately searching for an exit. The room seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls and ceiling melting away into darkness, and just as I felt cold hands brush against my back, I burst through a door and found myself outside again, gasping for air. But the sky was wrong. It was a deep blood red, with black clouds swirling overhead. The houses were gone. The world had changed. And somewhere deep in the distance, the music box still played, its lullaby now faster, more frantic. I hadn't escaped. I had only gone deeper. The ground beneath my feet felt wrong, soft and spongy, as if I were walking on something alive. I stumbled forward, the air thick and metallic, each breath a labor. The sky pulsed overhead like a living thing, and distant shapes flickered at the edges of my vision, just out of reach. I needed to keep moving. Standing still felt like an invitation to whatever unseen forces lurked in this distorted place. The sound of the music box grew louder, drawing me down a narrow path lined with skeletal trees. Their branches twisted into grotesque shapes, clawing at the air like desperate hands. Every so often, I thought I saw faces within the bark, twisted, screaming visages frozen in silent agony. Something brushed past me, invisible, cold, and fast. I spun around, heart hammering, but the path behind me was empty. When I turned back, the path had changed. Where there had once been open space, now stood a series of towering gates made of black iron, each one adorned with symbols that hurt my eyes to look at. Each gate was slightly ajar, swinging slowly as if breathing. At the base of the first gate was a plaque, tarnished and barely readable. I wiped away the grime with a trembling hand and squinted at the inscription. Through suffering, enlightenment. Through pain, rebirth. The gates creaked open wider, beckoning me forward. I stepped through. Instantly, the air shifted. The oppressive weight grew heavier, pressing down on my shoulders. The world beyond the gate was a wasteland, a barren, cracked desert stretching infinitely in all directions. In the distance, I could make out a lone figure walking away from me. I called out, but my voice was swallowed by the thick air. Driven by desperation, I followed. The closer I got, the more the figure began to take shape. A woman in a long, tattered dress, her hair cascading in waves down her back. She moved with an eerie grace, her feet barely touching the ground. When I was only a few paces behind, she stopped. Slowly, she turned to face me. Her eyes were black voids, endless and consuming. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Instead, I heard her voice inside my head, a whisper so loud it made my ears bleed. "You should not have come." The ground beneath her feet began to crack and splinter, black tendrils seeping up and out, reaching toward me. I stumbled back, but the tendrils moved faster, coiling around my ankles, pulling me down. I struggled, clawed at the dry earth, but it was no use. The ground opened up, swallowing me whole. I fell through darkness, tumbling end over end until I landed with a bone-jarring thud in a new place, a labyrinth. The walls were impossibly high, made of dark stone that seemed to absorb the little light there was. The corridors twisted and turned in impossible ways, each intersection leading only to more confusion. The air here buzzed with whispers, disjointed fragments of conversations, cries for help, sinister laughter. I chose a direction at random and began to walk. Time lost all meaning. Minutes felt like hours, and hours felt like days. Hunger gnawed at my stomach. Thirst burned my throat. But there was no food, no water, no escape. At one point, I stumbled upon a mirror set into the wall. My reflection was wrong again. It waved at me, grinning maliciously, before stepping out of the frame entirely. It walked beside me now, a twisted, mocking version of myself, whispering terrible things into my ear. You belong here. They are waiting for you. You are nothing but another lost soul in the maze. I tried to ignore it, pressing on. But the labyrinth shifted around me, doors appearing and disappearing at random, staircases leading nowhere, floors crumbling underfoot. Eventually, I found a door unlike the others, made of old wood, covered in carvings too intricate to fully comprehend. Something about it felt final. The reflection smiled wider. Go on, it urged. This is what you wanted, isn't it? I placed a hand on the door. It was warm to the touch, almost feverish. With a deep breath, I pushed it open. I stepped into a grand cathedral, its vaulted ceiling stretching up into nothingness. The pews were filled with figures shrouded in black, their faces hidden beneath heavy hoods. At the far end, an altar glowed with an otherworldly light. A man stood there, his back to me. He was tall, draped in crimson robes that shifted and writhed as if alive. He turned slowly, revealing a face that was horribly familiar. It was mine, but older, worn down, consumed by madness. He opened his arms wide, welcoming me. Come, he said, join the congregation, become whole. The hooded figures began to rise from their seats, turning toward me. Their faces were empty voids, featureless and hungry. I tried to run, but my body refused to obey. The robed man, the other me, smiled, and with a flick of his hand, the congregation surged forward. They descended on me, their touch ice cold, pulling, tearing, consuming. The world dissolved into darkness once more, and when I opened my eyes, I was back at the beginning, standing in the ruined street, the broken lullaby playing in the distance, the fog curling around my feet. But something was different. I was different. The mark on my chest burned, and I knew I would never escape. This place had become a part of me, and no matter where I went, it would follow. I staggered down the broken street, the city around me warping and shifting with every step. Buildings leaned at impossible angles, windows stretched into gaping mouths, and street lamps flickered with a sickly green glow. My shadow moved ahead of me, even when there was no light to cast it, twisting and contorting into forms that weren't mine. Somewhere in the distance, a clock tower tolled, its chime deep and dissonant, vibrating through my bones. The sound seemed to summon figures from the mist. Silhouettes lurching forward, their movements jerky and unnatural, like broken puppets dragged by unseen strings. I tried not to look at them, not to acknowledge their presence, but they sensed me anyway. Their heads snapped toward me in unison. One of them let out a low, gurgling wail. I ran. The street stretched endlessly before me, the city folding and unfolding itself in an endless maze of alleys and staircases and dead ends. No matter how fast I moved, I could hear them behind me, a scraping, clicking sound like bones rattling against stone. At some point, I stumbled into a subway entrance, descending into the fetid darkness without thinking. The air grew colder the deeper I went. Water dripped from the ceiling in slow echoing drops, and the walls were covered in strange symbols pulsating faintly with a dull red light. The platform was abandoned, the tracks swallowed by inky blackness. I heard a low growl from the tunnels. A train appeared, but it was wrong. The cars were rusted and deformed, their windows blacked out, and the wheels screeched against the rails as if protesting their own movement. Without thinking, I boarded the first car. The doors slammed shut behind me. Inside, the seats were covered in torn, faded fabric, stained with substances I didn't dare identify. The overhead lights flickered erratically, casting long, shifting shadows. I wasn't alone. Passengers sat hunched over, their faces hidden beneath heavy coats and scarves. I couldn't tell if they were alive or not. They didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even seem to breathe. I moved to the back of the car, trying to put as much distance as possible between me and them. The train shuddered into motion. As we moved, I caught glimpses through the cracked windows, barren wastelands, forests of dead trees, oceans of black water, places that shouldn't exist, places that no living thing should ever see. The further we traveled, the more the passengers began to change. Their heads twisted unnaturally, their limbs elongating, their skin peeling back to reveal bone and muscle and things that defied explanation. They twitched and convulsed in their seats, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. The lights overhead flickered again, and when they came back on, every passenger was standing, facing me. Their heads tilted at odd angles, their mouths stretched into grotesque grins. The doors at the far end of the car slammed open, and a conductor stepped through. He wore a tattered uniform, his hat cocked at a crooked angle. His face was a horror. Eyeless sockets leaking black ichor, teeth too sharp and too many for a human mouth. "Tickets, please," he rasped, holding out a skeletal hand. I didn't have a ticket. The passengers surged forward. I scrambled back, pressing against the rear door, but there was nowhere to go. Just when they were about to reach me, the train screeched to a halt, the force throwing me to the floor. The doors slid open. Without thinking, I threw myself out onto the platform, landing hard on cracked concrete. The train roared away into the darkness, taking its monstrous passengers with it. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, before I forced myself to stand. The station I found myself in was vast and cavernous, the ceiling lost in shadow. Massive pillars rose up around me, carved with grotesque depictions of suffering and despair. The only light came from flickering torches set into the walls, casting the space in a sickly orange glow. There were signs posted, but the words shifted and changed whenever I tried to read them, sliding out of focus like oil on water. I chose a direction at random and started walking. The tunnels here were vast, branching and twisting in ways that made no logical sense. Sometimes they sloped upward, other times downward, and occasionally the walls would seem to close in around me, forcing me to squeeze through impossibly tight spaces. I heard things moving in the darkness, skittering sounds, wet, slapping footsteps, distant, distorted voices calling my name. At one point, I passed a mirror embedded in the wall, and against my better judgment, I looked into it. My reflection was waiting. It grinned at me, its teeth long and needle-sharp, its eyes black and endless. It raised a hand and beckoned. I turned away, refusing to acknowledge it, and kept moving. Eventually, the tunnels opened into a massive underground chamber. In the center of the chamber was a well, a deep, black pit surrounded by a circle of stone obelisks. Each obelisk was etched with more of the shifting symbols, and as I approached, they seemed to hum with a low, vibrating energy. I felt an overwhelming compulsion to look into the well. I fought it, but it was like trying to resist gravity. Step by step, I was drawn closer until I stood at the edge, peering into the abyss. Something stared back. I couldn't see it. Not really, but I could feel it. A vast, ancient consciousness, older than humanity, older than the stars themselves. It pressed against my mind, whispering secrets I wasn't meant to know, promises of power, of escape, if only I would surrender. I teetered on the brink, my sanity slipping, and then a voice called out behind me. A woman's voice, firm and commanding. "Step away from the well." I turned. A figure stood there, cloaked in light, holding a staff carved with intricate runes. Her presence pushed back the darkness, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a sliver of hope. She gestured urgently. No time to explain. Come with me if you want to live. Without hesitating, I stumbled toward her. The thing in the well shrieked, a soundless roar that shook the very ground, but it could not cross the circle of obelisks. The woman led me into another tunnel, and as we fled, I knew that whatever lay ahead, it was better than what I had left behind. But, deep down, I also knew this journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. We ran through the tunnels, the woman's light casting long, trembling shadows along the crumbling stone walls. The air around us thickened, becoming almost syrupy with every step, and the howling rage from the well behind us still echoed through the endless corridors. She didn't speak as we moved, her focus fixed ahead, her staff occasionally tapping against the ground, sending out pulses of silver light that pushed back the creeping darkness. I struggled to keep pace, my legs burning, my lungs aching, but fear lent me strength I didn't know I had. Eventually, we burst into a cavern unlike anything I had seen before. The ceiling arched high above us, lined with crystals that pulsed with a slow, organic glow, like a heartbeat. In the center of the cavern stood a massive stone door, covered in ancient carvings that seemed to writhe and change when viewed from the corner of the eye. Surrounding the door were dozens of figures, other survivors maybe, each carrying torches or weapons fashioned from bone and iron. The woman finally stopped and turned to me, her face stern, but not unkind. "You're lucky you made it this far," she said, her voice low but steady. "Most don't." Where are we?" I managed to gasp, my body trembling. She glanced at the massive door. "The threshold. The last safe place before you reach the core of this realm." She touched my shoulder, her hand warm and grounding. "But once we open that door, there's no going back. Beyond it lies the true nightmare." I swallowed hard, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and flee. But where would I go? Back to the train? The shifting city? The thing in the well? I nodded. She offered a grim smile and turned back to the others, raising her staff. "Prepare yourselves," she commanded. "We breach the gate at dawn." As she spoke, a distant rumbling shivered through the cavern. Dust fell from the crystals above, and a deep, guttural moan seemed to vibrate up from the very ground beneath us. The others reacted immediately. Some tightened the grips on their weapons. Others whispered prayers in languages I didn't recognize. I found a spot near a dying torch and sank to the ground, my body giving out after everything it had endured. I watched as they moved with grim efficiency, setting up defenses, drawing protective runes along the walls, murmuring spells under their breath. The woman, their leader, I guessed, approached me again, this time kneeling beside me. "My name is Celine," she said. "I'm part of the Order of the Veil. We are all that stands between your world and it." "What is it?" I asked. She hesitated, her gaze darkening. "The heart of decay, a consciousness older than time. It feeds on fear, on suffering. It has been trapped here for millennia, but something is weakening the barriers. If it escapes, it will unmake everything." I shivered, not from the cold, but from the terrible certainty in her voice. "What can we do?" Celine looked toward the massive door. "We go through. We confront it. We stop it, or die trying." The others began to gather around her, forming a tight circle. Celine rose and addressed them all. "We are the last line. There will be no reinforcements, no escape. Beyond this door is the source of all the nightmares you have ever known. If you falter, if you lose yourselves, it will claim you." A grim silence fell over the group. One by one, they nodded. I felt something stir within me. Not courage exactly, but a desperate refusal to let the darkness win. I pushed myself to my feet and joined them. Celine raised her staff high, and the crystals above responded, pulsing brighter, sending ripples of light across the cavern. The stone door began to tremble. Cracks formed along its surface, spilling out streams of black mist. The air grew colder, heavier, filled with a fetid stench that made my stomach churn. With a deafening groan, the door slowly opened. Beyond was only darkness, thick, palpable, almost alive. Celine turned to us one last time. Stay together. Trust no voice but mine. And whatever you see, do not run. We stepped through. The darkness swallowed us instantly, the world dissolving into a swirling vortex of shadows and whispers. The ground beneath our feet shifted with every step, sometimes solid, sometimes like walking through deep, viscous mud. Strange shapes moved just out of reach, things with too many limbs, with faces that melted and reformed like wax. I clung to the others, moving when they moved, forcing my mind to stay anchored to the reality of our small, flickering group. But the darkness was clever. It whispered to me, in voices that sounded like lost friends, like loved ones begging for help. I grit my teeth and pressed on, refusing to look, refusing to listen. Ahead, a faint light began to glow. We pushed toward it, our movements slow as if wading against an invisible current. The light resolved into a structure. An ancient temple, its stones blackened and crumbling, its spires reaching into the endless night sky like skeletal fingers. Celine gestured for us to circle around. "This is the eye," she whispered. "The heart of decay slumbers beneath it." As we approached, the temple's massive doors swung open on their own. Inside, the air was thick and wet, every breath tasting of mold and rot. The floor was covered in murals depicting scenes of horror. Cities burning, oceans boiling, stars falling from the sky. At the center of the temple was a pit, much like the one in the earlier cavern, but larger, deeper, and far more malignant. A terrible rhythmic thudding echoed from within it like a heartbeat. Celine stepped forward, raising her staff high. "We sever the tether," she said. "We end this nightmare." But before she could act, the pit convulsed, and something rose from its depths. It was vast beyond comprehension, a mass of shifting flesh and bone and screaming faces, all fused together into a form that defied reason. Eyes opened across its surface, all turning to regard us with infinite malice. The heart of decay was awake, and it was hungry. The creature surged upward from the pit, its countless limbs writhing in a grotesque dance. The ground beneath our feet trembled as if the entire world recoiled from its presence. A wave of fetid air hit us, bringing with it a chorus of wailing voices, like an endless funeral dirge trapped in the throats of the damned. Celine moved fast, slamming the butt of her staff into the ground. A circle of light erupted around us, momentarily holding back the darkness that radiated from the heart. The others formed up, weapons drawn, faces pale but resolute. "Circle formation," Celine barked. "Protect the center." I stumbled into position, heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the others. I had no weapon, no training, but I wasn't about to break the line. The heart lashed out, one grotesque limb shooting forward, dripping with dark ichor. It struck the barrier of light with a thunderous crack, sending sparks of energy flying into the temple's crumbling walls. For now, the shield held. But it was already fraying at the edges. Celine began to chant in a tongue older than memory, her voice rising and falling in strange cadences. The others took it up, a rough, urgent chorus that vibrated through the stone beneath us. Symbols carved into the floor lit up, forming a massive sigil beneath our feet. The heart roared, a sound so immense it felt like the very air was being torn apart. It struck again, harder this time. The shield flickered. Cracks spider-webbed across the barrier. I gritted my teeth, fighting the urge to flee. I remembered Celine's words. Trust no voice but mine. Do not run." And then, from the swirling shadows beyond the circle, shapes began to emerge. At first, they looked like the others, survivors, friends, even family members. They called to us, their voices dripping with sorrow and pleading. "Come with us," they whispered. "You're not safe there. We can help you." I clenched my fists, digging my nails into my palms to keep focused. They weren't real. I knew it. But the longing in their eyes, the familiarity of their faces, gnawed at the edges of my sanity. One of the others broke ranks. A woman, tall, armored, fierce-looking, dropped her weapon and stumbled toward the phantoms. She cried out a name I didn't recognize, her voice cracking with emotion. Selene screamed at her to stop, but it was too late. The moment she crossed the boundary, the shadows engulfed her. Her scream was cut off in an instant, leaving only a wet, gurgling sound behind. The heart shrieked with triumph. The sigil beneath us dimmed slightly. Selene's chanting grew louder, more desperate. We were losing. The heart lashed out again, this time with a mass of tendrils tipped with snapping maws. They battered the shield relentlessly, and with a final shuddering whine, the barrier collapsed. The darkness rushed in. For a moment I thought it was over, that we would all be swallowed whole, digested by this ancient horror. But Selene wasn't finished. She slammed her staff into the ground again, this time unleashing a shockwave that knocked everyone and everything backward. She staggered, blood trickling from her nose, but she didn't fall. "Plan B!" she shouted. The others knew what she meant. They scattered, moving to secondary positions around the temple. Small altars had been set up at the 4 cardinal points, each inscribed with runes and piled with strange, organic offerings. I had no idea what to do. Selene grabbed me by the arm, pulling me toward one of the altars. "You're the catalyst," she gasped, her eyes wild with pain and fury. "It's why you were drawn here. It needs you to open the door completely. But if we turn that against it..." She didn't finish. Another tendril shot out of the darkness, wrapping around her leg and yanking her backward. She screamed, but managed to hurl her staff toward me before she was dragged into the abyss. The staff landed at my feet, humming with energy. The phantoms circled closer, their eyes hollow now, their mouths stretched into rictus grins. They whispered promises, lies, threats, anything to break my will. I clutched the staff and stumbled toward the altar. The heart roared again, the entire temple shaking. Stones fell from the ceiling. Cracks split the floor. I reached the altar and raised the staff, feeling a current of power surge up my arm. The symbols carved into the altar blazed to life, burning so brightly I had to shield my eyes. The phantoms shrieked in rage, their forms unraveling like smoke in a high wind. The heart thrashed, its limbs flailing wildly. One by one, the others activated their altars, each point of light forcing the darkness back, searing holes in its massive, shifting body. The staff vibrated violently in my hands. The sigils connected, forming a web of pure energy across the temple. The heart bellowed in rage and fear. It tried to retreat into the pit. But the web tightened, binding it in place. Selene's voice echoed in my mind even though I knew she was gone. "Finish it." I lifted the staff higher, focusing all my will, all my fear, all my rage into a single thought. End it! The staff exploded with light. The web constricted, slicing through the heart's mass, severing limbs, tearing flesh, silencing the wailing faces. The darkness recoiled, shuddered, and finally, with a sound like 1,000 wings beating in unison, it collapsed inward, sucked back into the pit from whence it came. Silence fell. A few survivors remained, standing among the rubble, blinking in disbelief. The heart of decay was gone, but the temple, it was crumbling fast. Without thinking, I bolted for the entrance, the others following close behind. Stones crashed down around us, dust filling the air. the ground splitting open beneath our feet. We barely made it out as the temple collapsed into itself, leaving only a vast, smoking crater where it had once stood. I dropped to my knees, coughing, my body trembling. Around me, the others wept, embraced, or simply stared at the ruins in stunned silence. It was over. Or so I thought. Because as I sat there trying to catch my breath, I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper carried on the wind. A promise. A threat. I am not done with you. And somewhere deep within the earth, something shifted. Waiting. Watching. Planning. Weeks passed, but the memory of that night refused to fade. Sleep became a rare luxury. Every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind stirring a primal fear inside me. I wasn't alone anymore. Or at least, it didn't feel like it. The others who had survived the heart's destruction met regularly, gathering in shadowed rooms and whispering about what we had done, what we had unleashed. Celine's absence weighed heavily on us. Some believed she had been consumed by the darkness. Others thought she had willingly sacrificed herself to imprison it once more. I wasn't sure what to believe. All I knew was that even though we had collapsed the temple, even though we had severed the heart's connection to the world, its echo remained, stitched into the fabric of our reality like a festering wound. The first signs were small, a chill in the air that no fire could chase away. Animals behaving strangely, eyes reflecting unnatural colors in the night, shadows that moved against the light, slipping through alleyways and across walls when no one was looking. And then the disappearances began. People from town vanishing without a trace, their homes left untouched, doors still locked from the inside. Families torn apart overnight, loved ones lost to the darkness that had been waiting, patiently, beneath the surface. We gathered again, this time not to celebrate survival, but to plan. "We need to finish what we started," Marcus said grimly, his scarred hands gripping a battered notebook filled with desperate scribbles. "If we don't, this thing will find a new way to crawl back into the world." The room fell silent, the flickering candlelight casting nervous glances among us. No one wanted to go back. But we knew we had no choice. There were rumors of another place, another site where the heart's influence had once taken root. Celine had mentioned it once, a passing reference scrawled in the margins of her journal. A ruined monastery on the cliffs far to the north, abandoned for centuries after a series of unspeakable tragedies. That's where we would find the next piece. The journey there was harrowing. The roads were half swallowed by creeping forests, mist coiling around our ankles like grasping fingers. At night, the air buzzed with whispers just beyond the range of our hearing, lulling some of us into restless sleep, baiting others to wander into the woods where the darkness waited. On the third night, we lost Andrew. One moment he was beside the fire, poking absently at the embers. The next, he was gone. No sound, no struggle, only his boots, left neatly beside his sleeping bag, as if he had simply stepped out of them and vanished. We pressed on, fear hollowing us out from the inside. By the fifth day, the monastery loomed ahead, perched atop the cliffs like a broken crown. Its towers leaned at impossible angles, shattered windows staring blankly over the ocean. Even from a distance, we could feel it. The weight of centuries of suffering pressed into the stone, the land itself groaning beneath it. We set up camp at the forest's edge, none of us daring to get closer, until daylight. That night, I dreamed. I stood in a vast, darkened hall, pillars of bone rising into blackness. In the distance, I heard a heartbeat, slow, deep, and wet. It called to me, each thud a command I could not refuse. I walked forward, my footsteps echoing endlessly. The air grew thick, rancid, filled with the scent of decay and old blood. And then I saw it. A door, enormous and ancient, covered in writhing symbols that burned into my eyes. It pulsed in time, with the heartbeat, each surge of sound cracking the stone around it. I reached out, compelled by something deeper than thought. As my fingers brushed the surface, the symbols shifted, forming words I could almost understand. "You open the way! You must open it again!" I woke with a gasp, cold sweat slicking my body. The others were awake too, faces pale, eyes wide with the same unspoken terror. They had seen it too. Whatever lay in that monastery wasn't waiting for us to find it. It was calling us, luring us forward. Dawn broke gray and cold, the sun a pale smear against the heavy clouds. We approached the ruins, weapons drawn, voices low and tense. Inside, the air was deathly still, broken only by the occasional drip of water from cracked ceilings. The monastery's halls were lined with statues of angels, their faces eroded into featureless masks. Tapestries rotted in place, scenes of divine glory eaten away by time and something far less natural. We found the main hall easily. At its center stood an altar, blackened and cracked, surrounded by faded symbols that mirrored the ones in my dream. Above the altar, a massive iron chandelier dangled, its chains rusted but unbroken, holding a cluster of long-dead candles. Beneath it, the floor bore a deep, circular groove, as if something vast and heavy had once spun there, grinding into the stone. The heartbeat grew louder, not in my mind now, in the very air around us. Marcus stepped forward first, tracing the symbols with trembling fingers. "This is it," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "This is where it continues." The ground shook, dust raining down from the rafters. Somewhere deep within the monastery, something stirred. We were not alone, and whatever waited for us had been waiting a very long time. The tremor in the ground grew stronger, a slow, rhythmic pulse that seemed to synchronize with our heartbeats. Each vibration sent a jolt through my bones, rattling my teeth and clouding my mind with a growing sense of dread. We exchanged glances, wordlessly agreeing that we needed to move fast. Whatever we had awakened wasn't going to wait patiently for us to act. Marcus knelt at the altar, flipping through Seleni's battered journal, his fingers smudging the ink with sweat. He mumbled under his breath, piecing together fragments of rituals and ancient warnings. I backed away from the altar, my flashlight scanning the crumbling walls, searching for signs of what lay hidden deeper within the ruins. Suddenly, a hollow, groaning sound echoed through the hall. The far wall, once solid stone, shimmered like a mirage. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface before the entire wall buckled inward, revealing a yawning corridor that plunged into darkness. "We're being invited," Marcus said grimly, closing the journal with a snap. "Or summoned." No one wanted to step forward. The hallway breathed cold air toward us, carrying with it a scent so foul it turned my stomach, a mix of rotting meat and damp earth, like a grave left open too long. Still, we had no choice. One by one, we entered the corridor, our footsteps muffled by the oppressive gloom. The wall seemed to close in, the stones sweating with moisture, strange symbols half visible beneath layers of moss and grime. Our flashlights flickered as we moved deeper, the batteries draining faster than they should have. As we advanced, the walls around us began to change. At first it was subtle, the moss giving way to something darker, almost organic. Veins pulsed beneath the surface, and the texture became slick and pliable under our fingertips. It was as if we were moving through a living thing, swallowed whole by the monastery itself. The heartbeat grew deafening. Finally, the corridor opened into a vast, circular chamber. The darkness waited. On the third night, we lost Andrew. One moment he was beside the fire, poking absently at the embers. The next, he was gone. No sound, No struggle, only his boots left neatly beside his sleeping bag, as if he had simply stepped out of them and vanished. We pressed on, fear hollowing us out from the inside. By the 5th day, the monastery loomed ahead, perched atop the cliffs like a broken crown. Its towers leaned at impossible angles, shattered windows staring blankly over the ocean. Even from a distance, we could feel it. The weight of centuries of suffering pressed into the stone, the land itself groaning beneath it. We set up camp at the forest's edge, none of us daring to get closer until daylight. That night, I dreamed. I stood in a vast, darkened hall, pillars of bone rising into blackness. In the distance, I heard a heartbeat, slow, deep, and wet. It called to me, each thud a command I could not refuse. I walked forward, my footsteps echoing endlessly. The air grew thick, rancid, filled with the scent of decay and old blood. And then I saw it. A door, enormous and ancient, covered in writhing symbols that burned into my eyes. It pulsed in time, with the heartbeat, each surge of sound cracking the stone around it. I reached out, compelled by something deeper than thought. As my fingers brushed the surface, the symbols shifted, forming words I could almost understand. You open the way! You must open it again. I woke with a gasp, cold sweat slicking my body. The others were awake too, faces pale, eyes wide with the same unspoken terror. They had seen it too. Whatever lay in that monastery wasn't waiting for us to find it. It was calling us, luring us forward. Dawn broke gray and cold, the sun a pale smear against the heavy clouds. We approached the ruins, weapons drawn, voices low and tense. Inside, the air was deathly still, broken only by the occasional drip of water from cracked ceilings. The monastery's halls were lined with statues of angels, their faces eroded into featureless masks. Tapestries rotted in place, scenes of divine glory eaten away by time and something far less natural. We found the main hall easily. At its center stood an altar, blackened and cracked, surrounded by faded symbols that mirrored the ones in my dream. Above the altar, a massive iron chandelier dangled, its chains rusted but unbroken, holding a cluster of long-dead candles. Beneath it, the floor bore a deep, circular groove, as if something vast and heavy had once spun there, grinding into the stone. The heartbeat grew louder, not in my mind now, in the very air around us. Marcus stepped forward first, tracing the symbols with trembling fingers. "This is it," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "This is where it continues." The ground shook, dust raining down from the rafters. Somewhere deep within the monastery, something stirred. We were not alone, and whatever waited for us had been waiting a very long time. The tremor in the ground grew stronger, a slow, rhythmic pulse that seemed to synchronize with our heartbeats. Each vibration sent a jolt through my bones, rattling my teeth and clouding my mind with a growing sense of dread. We exchanged glances, wordlessly agreeing that we needed to move fast. Whatever we had awakened wasn't going to wait patiently for us to act. Marcus knelt at the altar, flipping through Celine's battered journal, his fingers smudging the ink with sweat. He mumbled under his breath, piecing together fragments of rituals and ancient warnings. I backed away from the altar, my flashlight scanning the crumbling walls, searching for signs of what lay hidden deeper within the ruins. Suddenly, a hollow, groaning sound echoed through the hall. The far wall, once solid stone, shimmered like a mirage. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface before the entire wall buckled inward, revealing a yawning corridor that plunged into darkness. "We're being invited," Marcus said grimly, closing the journal with a snap. Or summoned. No one wanted to step forward. The hallway breathed cold air toward us, carrying with it a scent so foul It turned my stomach, a mix of rotting meat and damp earth, like a grave left open too long. Still, we had no choice. One by one, we entered the corridor, our footsteps muffled by the oppressive gloom. The wall seemed to close in, the stones sweating with moisture, strange symbols half visible beneath layers of moss and grime. Our flashlights flickered as we moved deeper, the batteries draining faster than they should have. As we advanced, the walls around us began to change. At first, it was subtle, the moss giving way to something darker, almost organic. Veins pulsed beneath the surface, and the texture became slick and pliable under our fingertips. It was as if we were moving through a living thing, swallowed whole by the monastery itself. The heartbeat grew deafening. Finally, the corridor opened into a vast, circular chamber. The ceiling soared high above us, lost in darkness. In the center of the room stood an enormous stone slab, stained black with centuries of blood. Shackles hung from its edges, the iron corroded and twisted into grotesque shapes. Surrounding the slab were 7 statues, each one more nightmarish than the last. They depicted beings that defied understanding, twisted amalgamations of man, beast, and something altogether alien. Their faces were frozen in expressions of ecstasy and agony, hands reaching outward as if beckoning us closer. On the slab lay a body. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, some old, desiccated corpse left as a warning. But then the body moved, its chest rising and falling in slow, laborious breaths. It was Celine. Her skin was pale and stretched thin, veins black and throbbing beneath the surface. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises that had turned a milky white. She tried to speak, but only a gurgling sound escaped her cracked lips. Marcus rushed forward, ignoring our shouted warnings. He gripped Celine's hand, tears streaming down his face. "Celine, we're here! We're going to get you out of here!" But Celine shook her head weakly, her mouth forming a single word. "Run." The statues groaned, their stone limbs cracking as they began to move. We stumbled back as the monstrous figures stepped down from their pedestals, their movements jerky and unnatural. Their mouths opened in silent screams, and the air grew thick with a pressure so intense it felt like it would crush us where we stood. Marcus tried to lift Celine, but the shackles held fast. "Help me!" he cried out. We rushed to his side, prying at the rusted chains, but they refused to give way. The statues closed in, their twisted forms blotting out what little light remained. And then Celine screamed. It wasn't a human sound. It was the raw, desperate wail of something far older and far more powerful. The very air shook with the force of it, and the statues hesitated, their movements faltering. Celine's body arched violently, and from her chest erupted a burst of light so blinding that it drove us to our knees. Through squinted eyes, I saw the chains dissolve into ash, the stone slab cracking down the middle. Marcus seized the moment, lifting Celine into his arms. "Go!" he shouted. We fled through the corridor, the statues howling behind us. The monastery trembled, stones falling from the ceiling as the entire structure began to collapse in on itself. We ran without looking back, Celine's limp form bouncing with each desperate stride. We burst into the gray daylight just as the monastery imploded, a pillar of dust and debris rising into the sky. Gasping for breath, we collapsed at the edge of the forest, watching in stunned silence as the earth swallowed what remained of that cursed place. Celine stirred weakly, her hand gripping Marcus's sleeve. "It's not over," she whispered, voice barely audible. "It's only just begun." The clouds overhead churned violently, and from deep within the forest a new sound rose. Not the heartbeat, but something worse, something laughing. And so, after all that we had witnessed, we found ourselves at the edge of the forest, gasping for air, eyes wide with fear, unable to comprehend the horrors we had escaped from. yet knowing deep in our bones that our survival was only temporary. The laughter in the distance, a mocking and sinister sound, haunted our every thought as we slowly realized the truth. We hadn't broken free. We had only awakened something that would follow us, relentlessly, for as long as we lived. Celine's frail voice, barely a whisper, still echoed in our minds, repeating the warning over and over. It's not over. As we looked back toward the ruins, the darkening sky above us seemed to swell with something ancient, something that had stirred far below the surface. Whatever had started in that cursed place had now spread out into the world. There was no escape. We had only just begun to understand the true power of what we had uncovered. The wind howled, carrying with it the faintest echoes of the ancient whispers. We didn't know where to go or how to keep running, but one thing was certain. The terror would always be with us, lurking just beyond our reach, waiting for the next moment to strike. Well, that's it for tonight. I know it was a lot to take in, but if you want to hear more stories that will keep you up, heart racing, and wondering what's lurking in the shadows, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And remember, no matter where you are tonight, be careful. You never know what might be watching from the darkness. Thank you for listening to The Night Reader. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt lost in the dark, remember, you're not alone. The stories we carry are what connect us. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment letting me know. Where are you listening from? Good night.